In this video, we'll implement a way to unlearn and reset skills which have been learned. Because unlearning or resetting skills can come in many forms in a game, such as a vendor in World of Warcraft, a mind wipe tonic in Ark, a game event, etc., we need a way to hook into our skill tree system and call this functionality from anywhere in our game code, depending on the needs of that particular game. Several videos ago, we created a function library with a single function, which allows us to access our skill tree system from anywhere. So this already exists. So in this video, we'll create the functionality to unlearn and reset skills, and then implement a practical example, a skill vendor, to call on that functionality from outside of the system. So the first thing we'll do is make the interface call. So in the Skill Tree Pro folder under MISC data, we'll open up our Skill Tree component interface, and we'll add two new functions. The first one will be unlearn skill, and the second one will be reset skills. And we want to drag these to the Skill Tree Pro category. And the reason we're doing this is because unlike these other ones, these are not internal calls. These calls are designed to be called from outside of the system. So this is a way that we can categorize things, and it'll make it easier to see what's available when we plug this system into various game projects. And in the unlearn skill, we just need to add an input called skill. This is a name variable because we need to know which skill we're unlearning. The reset skills, we don't need that because we're unlearning all skills. And because we want to keep these organized as functions instead of events, we can just add an empty bool to the output of both. And now our interface calls are done. We can compile and close that. Now we can go into our components folder, open up our Skilltree PC component, and under interfaces, Skilltree Pro, we see our two interface calls. And because we're going to have a bit of functionality in here, I want to have these calls just call an internal function in this blueprint. Because like we said before, if we change this interface and let's say delete this function call, the whole thing would go away. So I'm going to create two functions here. Unlearn skill internal and reset skills internal. And we're simply going to call those from here. The unlearn skill also needs the same input. So our interface calls are calling our internal calls. So now we're done with these interface calls, and we can work on what's going to happen when we unlearn skills and reset skills. We'll do the unlearn skill first. So when we're trying to unlearn a skill, we want to check our learned skills and see if it contains that skill. And this is a check to make sure that we have indeed learned it, because we can't unlearn something that we haven't learned. If false, then there's been a mistake we can return. If we can unlearn it, we'll do a sequence, add two pins. And the first thing we'll do is remove that skill from our learned skills. Remove item. And we have this skill input over here that we'll get. Now the next thing we want to do is reimburse the skill cost. So we need to check the data table for the cost, inputting the skill. And we're going to set the new research points to our current research points plus the cost of that skill that we're unlearning. And if you'll remember from the last video, in the event graph, we created this save state, and we want to call on that whenever the state of either of these two variables, research points or learned skills, changes. So the last thing we'll do in here is call that save state. And it turns out we only need 3 pins, not 4. Now we can do the reset skills. Now the purpose of resetting skills is to clear out all our skills and reimburse all the research points for those skills. A common pitfall here would be to get a reference to self, get class defaults, go down to the research points and set the research points to whatever the default would be. We're not going to do this because at various points in the game, we'll most likely be adding research points to the character. And the point of this function is not to reset the research points, but only to reset the skills. So we actually need to clear out the learned skills and calculate and reimburse the research points for each one of those learned skills that was learned. So the first thing we'll do is do that reimbursement. We'll get the learned skills for each. And in the same way as before, we'll find out the cost of each. And we'll scroll down on the left and we'll make a local variable for this function, and we'll call it accumulated cost. Make it an int. And so this represents the accumulated cost of all of the skills that we're reimbursing. And we're going to set it to the current accumulated cost, which starts off at 0, plus the cost of each skill we're reimbursing in a loop. So once we've calculated the reimbursement and this is complete, we want to add that reimbursement back to the research points, setting the research points to that new value. And then we can clear the learned skills. In order to do that, we need to make an empty array. And to do that, we need to right-click on this pin that automatically gets created and remove array element pin. And now it's an empty array. And the last thing we need to do here is, as always, save state. So now we're finished creating all the functionality to unlearn a skill or reset skills from anywhere in our game. And now we're going to implement a practical example of vendor to unlearn or reset those skills from outside the system. So to get the representation of a vendor without having to add the whole third-person content into our small modular system, we can go over here to settings and show engine content if it's not already checked. Click on the engine folder. I already have skeletal mesh selected here for filters. If you don't, you can just go here and select it up here. And we never want to modify engine content, so we can duplicate this and just drag our duplicated one up to the maps folder. And we can uncheck this skeletal mesh so we see all of our assets. Now we can just drag this into the world here. And over here we can click convert this actor into a reusable blueprint class. And we can keep everything as the default select. And it's created this new blueprint for us. We can select the blueprint and we can click on the mannequin in the world, scroll down to replace selected actors with, and replace with the new blueprint. So now the blueprint's in the world. And this is where we start, so we'll drag him in front of where we'll start. Now normally with a vendor in a game, we would have some kind of interaction functionality. You get close to him, you look at them, you press a certain key, and then a UI pops up. For the sake of brevity of this tutorial, because it's not about an interaction system, it's about a skill tree system, we're just gonna have an overlap event when we get close to him that pops up the UI. So we'll add a sphere collision, drag it up to the middle, increase the radius, 200. And with sphere selected, the new sphere collision, we want to scroll down and we want to add an on-component begin overlap event. And we can also go back to it and add an on-component end overlap event. So when we overlap this vendor, we're going to open his UI to unlearn and reset skills. And when we un-overlap him, we're going to close the UI. So we'll make those widgets. Actually, let's right click here, make a new folder, and we'll just make a folder for the vendor. And we can drag both of the meshes from the maps to the vendor folder. And here we have a redirector. One thing you can do with these is you can simply right click them, update redirector references. And because this project is local, it's not shared on source, we can delete down to the vendor folder. And now we'll make that widget. So right click, user interface, widget blueprint, user widget, open it up. You can just drag in a canvas panel. And we're just going to make this real quick and dirty and ugly because the point of this is just to test out the functionality of our system from outside of the system. So we'll just drag a button into the canvas panel, drag it somewhere in the center, drag a text over the button size to content, change the text to reset skills button. And with the button selected, we'll scroll down and we don't see anything. We need to select is variable. And then we have these events that populate. And when it's clicked, here is where we can call into our skill tree system. So if we right click anywhere and type in skill, we'll see this function library, skill tree pro. And this is the function that allows us to hook into our system from anywhere. And if we drag off this, reset skills, we'll see the reset skills message that we created. And that's all we need to do from anywhere in our game that we want to reset the skills. So now that the widget's set up, we'll come back to the vendor blueprint. So when we overlap the vendor, we'll create the widget, vendor widget. We'll save it out to a variable and add it to viewport. When we end the overlap, we'll remove from parent. And the last thing we need to do here is get player controller, set input mode game and UI, drag in the widget that we created here, and then set show mouse cursor. We want to check that. And then down here, get player controller, set input mode game only, and set show mouse cursor, we want it unchecked down here. That's all we need to do to set up our quick and dirty test. So now if we fire up our game and open up our skill tree, we'll see it's at its default state, and then we train a skill and we'll close our skill tree and reopen it. We can see that the skill is trained. And now we go over to our vendor, click on reset skills, back away, open up our skill tree again, and it's been set back to its default state. So resetting skills works. Now we want to test out our unlearned skill functionality. So back in the vendor widget, we'll copy these two, Click on the canvas panel, paste, and basically duplicating them. And we'll drag them under here, and we'll call this the Unlearn Skill button, and change the text to Unlearn Skill. I'm going to click on the Unlearn Skill button, scroll all the way down, unclicked event. So now in much the same way as above, if we just right-click, type in skill, get this function in the function library, we can just unlearn skill. And now it requests the skill that we want to unlearn. In a full-fledged system, we would have this widget pop open another widget that would populate a list of the skills that we have learned, the ones that we can unlearn, and then we would select which one to unlearn, and then that subsystem would kind of plug into here and choose a skill. Just for the sake of brevity of this tutorial, we're going to choose which skill to unlearn just to test out the functionality in our skill tree system. So if we open up our data table, remember this is the row name of the skill, so we can see fire here. So we'll just type in fire. Now we fire up our game and open up our skill tree. Let's train fire, air, and water. And we'll close down the skill tree, open it up, make sure it's still there. Go to the vendor, click Unlearn Skill, and we've unlearned fire. Now when we fire up the skill tree, fire has been unlearned. So this works as well. And we'll also notice we're back to 8 research points, which is the number we should be at. Now there is still one potential problem with this system. Let's say we train fire, and then we train something that's branching off of fire. Now if we close the skill tree, go to the vendor, unlearn the fire skill, open it back up. Now we haven't learned fire, but we've learned flame spark, and this shouldn't be allowed to happen. So we need a way to make sure that no child skills have been learned in order to be able to untrain that. We need a check for this. So what we can do to implement that is open up the component again, and back in the unlearn skill function, we can run a second check here to make sure that a child skill hasn't been learned. So after we see if the skill is not learned, we can copy this functionality here, getting the skill from the data table. And for its child nodes, we can run a for loop, F left click on the graph for each loop, and we can see if it is contained in the learned skills. Check each child, see if it's been learned. And if it has been learned, then we can simply return out of this function and not execute the rest. And if this operation completes, that means none of the children have been learned, so we can execute the functionality. So now if we fire up the game and open up our skill tree, we'll see that fire and flame spark have been learned. And if we approach the vendor and try to unlearn fire and then open up the skill tree again, we'll see that it didn't work, which is the way that it should be. So now we have a way to unlearn and reset skills in a modular way, so this system can fit within any game, and that functionality can easily be called from anywhere. In the next video, we'll add a few useful calls to the system from outside the system, such as the ability for the game to add research points to our skilling system, for example, once the character has learned enough experience, and the ability to check if a particular skill has been learned.